Imagine being born into a country where your faith is not a choice, it is a law. Imagine that before you could walk, before you could talk, before you could think for yourself. Your government had already decided what you believe, printed it on a card, and told you that changing it could land you in a cell. Now imagine that in the middle of all that, Jesus finds you anyway. This is the story of Hamza, and it will change the way you see everything. Stay with me. What is coming next will stay with you long after you finish reading. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching or reading from. I want us to be one family across this world, praying for each other, holding each other up, and reminding each other that none of us is alone in this. Just drop your location below. That is all. My name is Hamza. I am 40 years old, and I am telling you this in 2025 from a country that is not the one I was born in, because the country I was born in did not give me the freedom to be who I truly am. I was born in Malaysia, and in Malaysia, if you are Malay, your identity card says one word next to your name and your photograph. That word is Islam. You did not choose it. Nobody asked you. It was placed on that card before you were old enough to understand what belief even meant. And the frightening part is this: the law backs it up. In Malaysia, a Malay person who leaves Islam must go before a Sharia court to apply for permission, and that court almost never says yes. Instead, they send you somewhere, a place called a faith rehabilitation center. And I will tell you about that place in detail before this story is over, because the world needs to know it exists. I grew up in Kuala Lumpur in a quiet, comfortable neighborhood. My father was a government officer, disciplined, respected, and deeply proud of our family name. My mother was a school teacher who loved books and encouraged me to read anything I could find. I was their only son. I grew up between two worlds: the modern, fast-moving city outside our door, and the strict, unquestioned religious structure inside our home. Islam was not discussed in our house. It simply was. Like the walls, like the roof. You did not argue with it, you lived inside it. I was a curious child. While other boys my age were chasing footballs, I was chasing questions. Big questions. Why are we here? What happens after we die? Is God listening when I pray, or am I just talking to the ceiling? I never said those questions out loud. I learned very early that asking them was dangerous. My father once told me, calmly, without raising his voice, that too much thinking could lead a man away from the straight path. He said it like a warning. I heard it like a locked door. But locked doors only made me more curious about what was behind them. When I was in my late 20s, I enrolled at a local university to study literature. It was an unusual choice for a Malay man. Engineering and medicine were the respectable paths. Literature was seen as soft, impractical, even a little suspicious. What kinds of ideas would a young Malay man encounter in a literature classroom? As it turned out, life-changing ones. In one of my courses, we were assigned to read ancient texts as literature. Among them were portions of the Bible. I sat down expecting to find what I had always been told: a corrupted, unreliable book, inferior to the Quran in every way. What I found was something that cracked something open inside me. I read the Psalms, and I could not look away. Here was a man, David, crying out to God in raw, unfiltered pain, arguing with God, demanding answers from God, and God not only listening but loving him through it. In everything I had been taught about Islam, that kind of relationship with God was unthinkable. You submitted, you obeyed, you did not question, but David questioned, and God called him a man after his own heart. That single idea rearranged something inside me that has never gone back to where it was. Then, I read the Gospels, and I want to be honest with you. They did not read like a religious text. They read like truth. The Jesus I encountered in those pages was not the prophet of Islamic tradition, distant, formal, delivering a message and departing. This Jesus was close. He touched sick people. He wept at gravesides. He got angry at religious hypocrites who burdened people with rules while offering them no love. He said things that were either the deepest truth ever spoken or the words of a madman, and I could not decide which. So I kept reading. I read about a man named Lazarus who died and lay in a tomb for 4 days. And Jesus arrived at that tomb and wept. God in human form, weeping, not distant, not unmoved, weeping. And then he commanded the dead man to come out. A God who weeps and then conquers death. That was not the God I had grown up with. That was something infinitely larger, infinitely more tender, infinitely more real. I began reading the Bible in secret, on my phone, late at night, the way everything important in my spiritual life would happen, secretly. In Malaysia, the Bible is complicated for Muslims. Malay language Bibles have been seized by authorities. The message from the government was clear and unmistakable. This book is not for you. You are Malay. Stay where you belong. But I could not stop. One night during a heavy tropical rainstorm, the kind that makes the whole city disappear behind a curtain of falling water, I was alone in my small apartment reading the book of Romans, and I reached a passage where the writer declared that there is no condemnation for those who belong to Jesus. No condemnation. I sat with those two words for a long time, because condemnation was all I had ever known from religion, the constant measuring, the fear that my prayers were not enough, my fasting was not enough, that the scale would tip the wrong way on the day of judgment. Condemnation had been the sound my faith made for 40 years, and here was a voice telling me it was over, that the price had already been paid, that the door was already open. I slid off my chair onto the floor of that apartment, and I prayed to Jesus for the first time in my life. I told him I believed. I told him I had 1,000 questions, but I believed. I told him I was his. As the storm raged outside, but inside that apartment something happened that I do not have full words for. A stillness settled into me, not the stillness of an empty room, the stillness of a room that has been completely, perfectly filled. The fear I had carried my whole life, the dread, the measuring, the never enough, was gone. I was full. For the first time in 40 years, I was genuinely, completely full. What came after that night was the hardest season of my life. I found a small underground group of Malay Christians in the city. I want you to understand what those words mean. Underground. We met in different apartments every 2 weeks, never the same place twice. We arrived separately and left separately. We spoke through encrypted messaging apps. We used careful, coded language even in private. We sang worship songs, but quietly. Always quietly. Because if we were discovered, the consequences were not theoretical. They were legal. Let me tell you what those consequences looked like. Because this is the part that most people outside Malaysia never hear about. One of the men in our group, I will call him Farouk, had been reported by a neighbor who saw him entering a church building. Within days, officers from the Islamic Religious Authority came to his workplace. They questioned him in front of his colleagues. They told him he had been seen engaging in behavior inconsistent with Islam. They ordered him to report to a faith rehabilitation center, and he had no legal right to refuse. Farouk spent 4 months in that center. 4 months. Let me describe what that looked like. He was not in a prison with iron bars, but he was not free. He attended compulsory Islamic instruction sessions every single day, morning to evening. He was counseled repeatedly, pressured to admit that he had been confused, manipulated, deceived by outside influences. He was told that what he felt for Jesus was not real, that it was a spiritual sickness, that Islam was healing him. His family was notified. His workplace was notified. The stigma wrapped around his name like a chain that he would drag behind him for years. And here is the part that broke my heart when he told me about it. They monitored his emotions. If he seemed too peaceful, too settled, they grew suspicious. Peace was evidence of resistance. Joy was evidence that the rehabilitation was not working. So he learned to look broken on the outside while protecting what was real on the inside. He learned to perform despair while guarding his joy. When he came out of that center, he said all the right things. He performed all the right rituals. The authorities marked his file as resolved. But inside, nothing had changed. He told me that they could fill a room with Quran recitation and force a man's mouth to say the right words, but they could not reach the place where Jesus lived inside him. That place, he said, was deeper than any of them could dig. I carried that truth with me every day of my double life. Every Friday prayer at the mosque near my office, standing in the rows, going through the motions, my mouth reciting Arabic while my heart was somewhere else entirely. I held on to what Farouk had told me. They cannot reach that place. They cannot reach that place. But the weight of the double life was immense. I am an honest person by nature. Deception does not sit easily in me, and yet my survival required total, comprehensive, daily deception. Deceiving my parents, deceiving my colleagues, deceiving the imam. Every conversation was a performance. Every family gathering was a minefield. There were nights I came home and sat on the floor of my apartment and asked Jesus to forgive me for living a lie. Even a lie I had been forced into by circumstances beyond my control. He always answered, not with a voice I could hear with my ears, but with that quiet inner certainty that I was known, that I was seen, that the day was coming when the pretending would end. That day came when I fell in love. Her name was Li Mei. She was Chinese-Malaysian, a graphic designer with a laugh that could fill a room. She was a Christian, and in Malaysia, the law does not allow a Malay Muslim man to marry a non-Muslim woman unless she converts to Islam. There was no legal path for me to become Christian and marry her. The system only moved in one direction, toward Islam, never away from it. Li Mei was not going to convert to Islam. I was not going to ask her to, and so the decision became clear. If I wanted to build my life with the woman I loved, I had to leave the country I had always called home. Telling my parents was the hardest thing I have ever done. I told my mother first. She sat across from me in the living room where I had grown up, and I watched her face as I told her the truth. All of it. The Bible. The rainstorm. The prayer. Jesus. Her eyes filled with tears before I was halfway through. She did not shout. She simply wept. And through her tears, she told me that if this became known, my father's entire career would collapse. He was a government officer, a Malay government officer. An apostate's son would be used against him by rivals, whispered about in corridors, weaponized in performance reviews. My faith was not just a personal matter. It was a professional bomb. My father's reaction was controlled. He was too disciplined to shout, but his voice was tight and his jaw was set hard when he told me I would attend counseling. I would speak to a scholar. I would go to the rehabilitation center if necessary, but I would not leave Islam. When I told him I was leaving Malaysia entirely, leaving to build a life abroad with Li Mei, he stood up from his chair and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to me for a long time. When he turned around, I saw something in his face that was worse than anger. It was fear. He told me that if I left, he could not protect me. He told me that everything he had built, his reputation, his career, our family's standing, could be destroyed by what I was choosing. I told him I was sorry, and I meant it with everything in me, but I could not unknow what I knew. I could not unfeel what I had felt on the floor of that apartment during the rainstorm. I could not go back to the performance. He sat down heavily, and then this man, this disciplined, controlled, proud man who had held our family together with steady hands his entire life, put his face in his hands and cried. My mother went to him and put her arm around his shoulders. And I sat across from them and felt the grief of loving people deeply and still having to choose truth over their comfort. The night before my flight, my father walked me to the door. He stood in the doorway with the warm light of our family home behind him. And he told me something I will carry for the rest of my life. He said he did not understand my God, but he could see that something had happened to me. He said I seemed more like myself than he had ever seen me. He did not know what that meant, he said, but he could not deny what he saw. Then he told me to come back. Whatever happened, wherever I went, whatever I believed, to come back to them. I hugged him, and I told him I would. On the plane, I opened a small package my mother had pressed into my hands as I left. Inside was a photograph of our family taken years ago at the beach. My parents young and smiling, me as a small boy squinting against the sun. She had written on the back in Malay, "Wherever you are ours." I held that photograph above the South China Sea, and I wept, not from regret, from the weight of love. Love for a family I was leaving. Love for a God who had found me in a country that said he wasn't allowed to. Love for a future I was finally free to walk toward. I am 40 years old now. I live abroad with Li Mei, who is my wife. We are expecting our first child. We attend a church where I can sing at full volume, with my hands raised and my eyes closed, and not a single person in that room is afraid. Every Sunday, when I worship openly, I think of Farouk. I think of the 12 people in that locked apartment in Kuala Lumpur singing in whispers. I think of every Malay man and woman who was right now hiding their Bible on their phone, meeting in rotating locations, living the double life I lived. I pray for them every day. Their freedom is my unfinished business. And I think of my father standing in that doorway. The open invitation he left me. Come back. That door standing open is its own kind of love, and one day, I believe this with everything in me, I will walk back through it as exactly who I am, not performing, not pretending, just Hamza, free. Brothers and sisters, I am asking you to pray. Pray for every secret believer in Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and every country where faith is assigned by law rather than chosen by heart. Pray for the ones sitting in rehabilitation centers right now, their bodies confined, their mouths forced to say words they do not mean, their souls holding on to Jesus in the one place no authority can reach. Pray that their hidden faith becomes uncontainable. Pray that the underground church grows until the walls cannot hold it anymore. And if you are reading this and you have never surrendered your life to Jesus, if you are tired of performing, tired of fear, tired of religion without relationship, I want to invite you to pray this simple prayer right now. Wherever you are, Lord Jesus, I believe you are the Son of God. I believe you died for my sins and rose from the dead. I cannot earn my way to you, and I am done trying. I receive your forgiveness as a free gift right now. Come into my life. Be my Lord. I am yours, whatever it costs and wherever it leads. If you prayed that, you are not alone. Find other believers, tell someone you trust, and know this, the God who found a Malay man in a locked apartment during a tropical rainstorm in 2025 sees you right now. He knows your name, not the name on your identity card, your real name, the one he has been calling since before you were born.